Most people think the soul is a simple thing. You're born, you live, you die, and somewhere in that sequence you have a soul, a generic, undifferentiated spiritual passenger along for the ride. That's the version handed to almost everyone. Doesn't matter if it came from a church, a meditation app, or a philosophy class. The framing is the same. Your soul is your soul, unique to you, but originating from the same flat spiritual plane as everyone else's. But the Gnostic texts don't say that. Not even close. What the Gnostics actually mapped out, in painstaking, almost architectural detail, was a layered reality called the Pleroma, a vast, luminous fullness of divine emanations, each level distinct, each carrying its own quality of consciousness, its own frequency of light. And the question they were obsessed with wasn't just, where do souls go after death? It was something far more specific, something that cuts right to the center of who you actually are. Where did your soul come from? Because not all souls originate from the same level. That idea, the idea that the origin point of your soul determines something essential about your inner life, your spiritual hungers, your particular form of restlessness. That's what this video is about. And once you understand the structure of the Pleroma, certain things about yourself that have never quite made sense are going to suddenly make a very specific kind of sense. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Library. Let's start with a word most people have heard and almost nobody has actually unpacked: Pleroma. In Greek, it means fullness, completion. The totality of the divine reality before anything went wrong, before anything fragmented, before the material world entered the picture at all. The Apocryphon of John, one of the most significant texts recovered from the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945, describes the Pleroma not as a place but as a living totality, a self-knowing, self-illuminating divine reality structured in emanations the way light refracts through a prism, not one undifferentiated beam, distinct qualities, distinct expressions, each one flowing from the source, each one carrying a specific aspect of what the divine is. Here's the analogy that finally cracked this open for me. Imagine a symphony, not the recording of it, the live performance. The conductor, the strings, the brass, the percussion, they are not the same instrument. They are not interchangeable, but they are all part of one unified musical event. Remove the strings entirely, and you haven't just lost some notes. You've lost a specific quality of resonance that nothing else in the orchestra replicates. That's how the Pleroma works. Each level, each emanation contributes something irreplaceable to the total divine fullness. The Gnostic texts, particularly the Valentinian tradition, named after Valentinus, the Gnostic theologian who came within a single vote of becoming Bishop of Rome in the 2nd century, organized the Pleroma into what they called aeons. Divine emanations arranged in paired male-female dyads, each pair representing a complementary aspect of divine knowing. The Apocryphon of John lists these in detail: forethought and grace, understanding and incorruptibility, eternal life and will, intellect and truth. These aren't metaphors. In Gnostic cosmology, these are real ontological structures, actual layers of divine reality that existed before matter, before time, before the catastrophe that produced the world you're sitting in right now. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. The Gnostic texts do not describe human souls as a homogeneous group. The Pistis Sophia, a massive Coptic text dating to roughly the 3rd or 4th century, spends considerable portions of its content mapping the relationship between different classes of souls and different regions of the divine light world. And the distinctions it draws are not trivial. They describe souls as carrying specific signatures, specific origins, specific resonances that pull them, even in the midst of full incarnate amnesia, back toward particular frequencies of truth. The question then is not whether you have a soul. You do. The question is which layer of the divine architecture that soul originally emerged from. And the answer to that question explains something the conventional framework has never been able to explain adequately. Why do some people spend their entire lives feeling like they're from somewhere else? I've gotten comments on this channel that stop me mid-sentence. On my video about the reincarnation trap, a viewer wrote, "I understand, a trap, a prison, no chains or walls, just total amnesia. I am a divine spark of the monad." That's not someone parroting a concept they read about. That's someone describing a felt experience of origin, of displacement, of knowing something structurally about themselves before they had the vocabulary to name it. That's Pleroma memory, and it's more common than the mainstream framework has any interest in acknowledging. So what are the actual levels of the Pleroma? Let's go through them, not as an abstract theological inventory, but as a living map you can hold up against your own interior experience. At the apex is the monad, the source, the invisible, unknowable, perfectly self-sufficient divine principle that the Apocryphon of John describes in language that is almost impossible to reduce without losing something essential. The monad is a monarchy with nothing above it. It is pure light which no eye can behold. No attributes, no limitations. Not a being among beings, but the ground from which being itself flows. The Gnostic texts are unanimous on this. The monad does not create the world directly. It doesn't need to. It simply is, and in being, it overflows. From the monad, the first emanation flows, barbello. In the Apocryphon of John, barbello is described as the first thought of the invisible spirit, the initial movement of the monad towards self-knowing. She is the divine foreknowledge, the first mirror in which the source sees itself. And this level of the Pleroma carries a specific quality, pure, undiluted awareness without object. Not awareness of something, just awareness, aware of itself. Souls that originate near this level tend to carry a peculiar quality that's difficult to describe accurately. They're not necessarily religious. They don't need doctrine. What they carry is a kind of primordial stillness that coexists with, sometimes uncomfortably, the noise of ordinary life. Below barbello in the Valentinian mapping comes the Christ aeon, the divine self-disclosure, the moment the invisible light becomes intelligible. The quality here is revelatory. It moves, it illuminates. Souls with this resonance tend to be compulsive explainers, not because they're arrogant, because they're oriented, constitutionally, toward making the hidden visible. The burning need to articulate what most people leave inarticulate. Sound familiar? Then come the lower aeons, the paired emanations I mentioned earlier, depth and silence, mind and truth, word and life, each pair operating as a kind of divine lens, refracting the original light into increasingly specific qualities. The aeon of word and life, logos and zoe in the Greek, carries a specific signature in souls, an orientation toward meaning-making that is inseparable from vitality. These are people for whom understanding isn't intellectual exercise, it's survival. It's breath. They don't study ideas, they metabolize them. Now, here's where the story gets complicated, and where the real cosmological drama begins. The boundary of the Pleroma, what the Gnostic texts call the horos or the cross, is the threshold between the divine fullness and everything beneath it. And it was a crisis at this boundary that produced the material world. The aeon Sophia, wisdom, in her desire to know the source directly, without her complementary partner, generated something, an act of divine will that exceeded its proper channel. The Gnostic Gospel of Philip and the longer accounts in Irenaeus's 2nd century heresiological writings both describe what emerged: a flawed, partial consciousness, a being who thought itself the highest reality because it couldn't perceive what was above it. The demiurge, souls that originate near the boundary of the Pleroma, close to where Sophia's fall occurred, carry a different signature. They feel the pull of the material world acutely. They are not indifferent to it, but they carry, simultaneously, a grief that the material world cannot locate the source of, a longing that no relationship, no achievement, no accumulation satisfies. As I covered in my video, Church God versus the True God, what they've been hiding your whole life, that grief isn't pathology. It's orientation. It's a soul remembering dimly that the world it's in is not the world it's from. I want to be precise about something I noticed in myself during the period I spent going through the Pistis Sophia line by line. This took me the better part of 2 weeks, reading it in chunks, cross-referencing the Coptic terms with scholarly translations. What struck me wasn't the cosmological architecture itself. It was how accurately it described specific emotional textures I had carried my entire life without a framework to understand. The sense of being in the wrong register. Not depressed, not anxious, just slightly mistranslated, like a piece of music being played in the wrong key, technically correct but unmistakably off. The Pistis Sophia gave that a name, and naming it changed something. Now, Before we go further into what this means practically, if you've been feeling the pull of exactly this kind of deeper knowledge and want to go further than what's possible on this platform, our free newsletter Insights Academy is where I share what's too layered for YouTube. Sign up now, and for a limited time, you'll receive a free copy of The Kabbalion as an ebook. It won't be available for long, and the link is in the description. Here's the part of Gnostic teaching that makes people deeply uncomfortable. And I want to lean into that discomfort deliberately, because the discomfort is the tell. The Gnostic tradition, particularly the Valentinian school, but also the Scythian texts and the Pistis Sophia, taught a tripartite division of human souls. 3 categories, not 3 personality types, 3 ontological orientations, 3 fundamental relationships to the light. The first category, helix, from the Greek hyle, matter. Souls whose orientation is almost entirely toward the material level of existence, not stupid, not evil, but operating from within the demiurge's world without any persistent interior signal pointing beyond it. The Gnostic texts are not dismissive of helix, there is compassion in the framing, but they are direct. For a soul fully captured by the material level, the call of the Pleroma simply doesn't register. It's not suppressed, it's just not present. The second category, psychics, from psyche, soul. This is the middle ground, and the Valentinian texts spend considerable time here. The psychic soul has an interior life. It has spiritual hunger. It reaches toward the divine, but it reaches within the framework the demiurge set up, through religion, through ritual, through moral performance, through the structures the institutional church would later formalize. The psychic soul is genuinely seeking, but it's seeking through the mechanisms of the world that contains it. It has the hunger without the specific frequency that would bypass the demiurge's architecture entirely. This is, I personally think, the most important and most underappreciated distinction in the entire Gnostic framework, because most spiritual seeking, including most of what fills self-help shelves and megachurch sanctuaries, operates at the psychic level. Real hunger, wrong direction. Not wrong in a damning sense, wrong in the sense of a compass that's been calibrated slightly off true north. You'll travel a very long way and end up somewhere adjacent to where you were trying to go. The third category, pneumatics, from pneuma, spirit. Souls that carry a spark of the Pleroma itself, a direct ontological connection to the divine fullness that no amount of institutional religion can replicate, manufacture, or substitute for. The pneumatic soul doesn't just believe in the divine. It knows, in the Gnostic sense of gnosis, direct, interior, unmediated recognition, that it is of divine origin. Not metaphorically, not aspirationally, constitutionally. Now stay with me here, because this is where people either track with the Gnostic framework fully or lose the thread. This is not elitism. The Gnostic texts are not saying that pneumatics are better people. They're saying that pneumatics carry a specific kind of interior pressure, a restlessness that is, in the truest sense, a homing signal. The pneumatic soul cannot fully settle into the demiurge's world because it is not from there. It experiences the material world the way a deep ocean creature might experience a tide pool. Technically alive in it, constitutionally wrong for it. Here's what this maps onto experientially. The viewer comment that stopped me cold came from my video, "I prayed to the monad every night for a week." Someone wrote, "It happened to me this year at 51. My mind is totally silent for the first time in my life since studying the monad." 51 years. That's 51 years of interior noise that finally went quiet when the correct cosmological framework made contact with a soul that had been waiting for it. That's not a conversion experience. That's not emotional release. That is a pneumatic soul recognizing its own signal after decades of static. That's the specific quality the Gnostic texts are pointing at. And there's a corollary to the 3 soul types that the conventional framing always misses. The Valentinian texts, particularly as reconstructed from Irenaeus's accounts and the Nag Hammadi fragments, do not describe these categories as permanent caste assignments. They describe them as orientations that can be activated, deepened, or clarified through gnosis itself. The pneumatic soul doesn't automatically know what it is, it has to remember. The entire Gnostic soteriological project, if you want to use the technical term, is the process of that remembering, not acquiring new information, not performing new rituals, stripping away the layers of demiurgic conditioning until what was always there becomes recognizable again. Knowledge, direct, interior, unmediated. That's the movement the Pleroma levels describe, not a hierarchy of worth, a map of return. So here's what the map actually looks like when you're standing inside it. The Pleroma isn't somewhere else. That's the piece that took me the longest to genuinely absorb. Not just understand intellectually, but actually sit with. I remember spending an entire evening rereading the Valentinian cosmological passages, cross-referencing what Irenaeus described with the fragments we actually have from Nag Hammadi, and hitting this same wall over and over. The Pleroma is described as fullness, totality, the complete self-expression of the monad, which means if you are a pneumatic soul, a soul carrying a genuine spark of that origin, you are not separated from the Pleroma the way a continent is separated from another continent by ocean. You are separated the way a dream is separated from the dreamer. The dream seems real from inside it. The dreamer is the substance of the whole thing. That distinction changes everything about how you interpret the levels. Let's start with what the Valentinian tradition actually describes as the first level of pneumatic orientation, the moment of recognition. In the excerpts of Theodotus, preserved through Clement of Alexandria, there's a passage that I keep returning to. What liberates is the knowledge of who we were, what we became, where we were, whither we have been thrown, wherefore we are being redeemed, what birth is, and what rebirth. That sequence isn't accidental, it's a diagnostic. It's asking a specific set of questions in a specific order: origin, deviation, current state, trajectory, and mechanism of return. Most spiritual systems collapse all of that into one question: how do I get better? The Gnostic framework insists you cannot answer that question honestly until you've answered the prior ones. Now here's where it gets cosmically significant. The pneumatic level, the highest orientation in the tripartite structure, isn't primarily described as a place you arrive. It's described as a condition you uncover. The Apocryphon of John speaks of the luminaries, the great aeons within the Pleroma itself: Harmazel, Oroyael, Davithai, Elileth, each associated with distinct qualities, distinct modes of divine self-expression. In certain Valentinian readings, these aren't just cosmological furniture, they function as signatures. Aspects of the Pleroma that a pneumatic soul carries an affinity with, based on what kind of divine light was embedded in it before its descent into material existence. And this is where the which level question becomes genuinely interesting rather than just cosmologically decorative, because the tradition isn't saying every pneumatic soul is identical. It's saying that within the category of pneumatic orientation, souls capable of gnosis, souls that carry the authentic divine spark, there are still differences in character, in disposition, in the specific quality of light that was instantiated when the soul was, to use the Gnostic technical vocabulary, breathed out by Sophia into material form. The tripartite tractate from Nag Hammadi develops this further than almost any other text. It distinguishes not just between the three soul types, but within the pneumatic type, describes those who incline toward the Father, toward the Son, toward the Spirit. Different relational orientations within the same fundamental category of awakening. I personally think this is the most underrated dimension of the entire Gnostic cosmological project. The idea that Gnosis isn't a single flavor, that the Pleroma's fullness expresses itself through genuine plurality, and that your particular way of encountering the divine isn't an imperfection to be overcome, but a specific expression of which Aeon's light is dominant in your constitution. The tradition doesn't ask you to flatten your individual character into a generic spiritual type. It asks you to understand your individual character as itself a cosmological signature. A viewer named Evander left a comment on my video, "Church God versus the True God, what they've been hiding your whole life that stopped me cold." He wrote, "Power begins with perception. If authority exists only because we accept it, then refusing to acknowledge it is the first act of true freedom." That's not just a political statement. In Gnostic terms, that's a precise description of what happens at the pneumatic level of orientation. The demiurge's authority over the soul exists only insofar as the soul accepts the demiurge's ontological framing, that the material world is the real world, that the creator of material conditions is the ultimate divine power, that the soul's longing for something beyond is either illusion or sin. The moment a soul begins to see through that framing, not to dismiss it intellectually, but to genuinely recognize it as a constructed overlay on a deeper reality. That's the first move of pneumatic activation. And the levels of the Pleroma are, in this reading, a map of how deep that activation goes. The first level isn't enlightenment, it's orientation reestablishment. Recognizing that there is something wrong with the inherited picture of reality, that the God of the mainstream tradition and the ultimate source of being are not the same entity. That's the hillock to psychic threshold. Most people never cross it, not because they're incapable, but because everything in the constructed world is designed to make that question feel unnecessary, dangerous, or arrogant. The psychic to pneumatic threshold is different. It's not about acquiring the right beliefs. A psychic soul can hold all the correct Gnostic ideas, can read every Nag Hammadi codex, can quote the Apocryphon of John chapter and verse, and still be operating at the psychic level. Because the psychic level is where information lives. The pneumatic level is where recognition lives. That's not gnosis. That's just a library card. Which brings us to the question the title actually promised. Which level of the Pleroma is your soul from? And I want to be honest with you about what this question can and can't tell you. Because there's a version of this inquiry that becomes spiritual vanity, that becomes a way of flattering yourself with the idea that you're pneumatic and therefore special and therefore exempt from the actual work. The ancient teachers were extremely clear about this failure mode. The Testimony of Truth, a Nag Hammadi text that's unusually sharp-edged compared to most of the corpus, is almost contemptuous of people who collect Gnostic ideas without undergoing Gnostic transformation. The critique is basically this: knowing about gnosis is not the same as having it. A soul that decorates itself with pneumatic vocabulary while remaining functionally asleep is still operating at the hillock level, regardless of what it calls itself. So the question isn't, am I pneumatic, as a category to assign yourself. The question is, what is actually happening inside you when you encounter these ideas? Here's the diagnostic the tradition actually offers, and it's deceptively simple. If these ideas feel like new information, interesting, exciting, worth knowing, you are at the psychic level of engagement. That's not a condemnation, that's a starting point. The psychic level has real spiritual traction. The Valentinian tradition honored it. It's where the work of moral ordering, of taming the impulses that keep the soul bound to material world patterns, actually happens. You cannot skip it. Trying to access pneumatic recognition while bypassing the psychic discipline is like trying to receive a radio signal without first quieting the static. The work of the psychic level is static reduction. If these ideas feel like recognition, like something you somehow already knew and had simply never been given language for, that's the indicator the tradition points to. Not a feeling of superiority, a feeling of homecoming. There's a difference, and it's visceral once you've experienced both. Information feels like addition. Recognition feels like subtraction, like something being stripped away rather than something being gained. I want to share something that happened to me the first time I worked carefully through the Valentinian aeon structure. The description of the 30 aeons within the Pleroma, the paired syzygies, the outermost position of Sophia at the edge of the fullness before her fall. I'd read about it before. I'd understood it intellectually before. But one night I was sitting with the tripartite tractate, working through the section on the pre-cosmic ordering of the aeons, and something moved. I'm not going to dress that up. I'm not going to tell you I had a vision or that the room changed. What happened was internal, like a key turning, like a sentence I'd been trying to complete for years, suddenly finding its last word. Not an emotional surge, something quieter than that. The recognition that the longing I had carried for as long as I could remember, the sense that the visible world was not the whole story, that there was something behind the scenery, was not a deficiency. It was a signature. It was the soul's memory of where it came from, pressing through the demiurgic conditioning. That's what the Pleroma levels are pointing at. Now let's talk about where you sit within that. The Valentinian tradition describes the highest pleromatic orientations, those associated with the luminaries closest to the monad, as characterized by a specific quality, not spiritual power, not special knowledge, but a kind of stillness that is also fullness. In the Apocryphon of John, the aeon Harmazel is associated with grace, truth, and form, Oroyael with conception, perception, and memory, Devathai with understanding, love, and idea, Eleleth with perfection, peace, and wisdom. These aren't arbitrary assignments. They describe the quality of divine light as it steps down through successive emanations, each aeon expressing a slightly more externalized, more differentiated mode of the original undifferentiated unity of the monad. If you find yourself drawn to beauty and form as modes of encountering the sacred, if aesthetic experience carries something numinous for you, if the world's structure itself feels like a kind of language, the tradition might locate your pneumatic affinity closer to Harmazel's domain. If memory is your operative faculty, if you are haunted by a sense of something you once knew, if déjà vu feels less like a neurological glitch and more like a signal, the Oroyael correspondence may be doing something for you worth examining. If your path into the sacred has always run through intellectual love, through the experience of understanding something so deeply it moves you, that trace points toward Davathai. And if what characterizes your deepest spiritual experience is the recognition of wholeness, moments when everything suddenly coheres, when the fragments resolve, Eleleth's signature of peace and perfection is worth sitting with. I'm Daniel, and this is Gnostic Library. And the reason I keep coming back to these questions, the reason this channel exists, is because these frameworks don't just satisfy intellectual curiosity. They do something. They change the relationship between you and your own interiority. They give the soul a mirror it didn't have before. As I explored in my video, The Reincarnation Trap, How the Archons Recycle Your Soul, the Gnostic tradition's entire urgency rests on a single premise. The soul that does not remember its origin is vulnerable to the recycling mechanisms of the demiurgic world. Understanding which level of the Pleroma your soul resonates with isn't a personality test. It's orientation work. It's the beginning of knowing which direction home actually lies. The Pleroma is not a prize for the worthy. It's the origin of the real. And the soul that begins to remember where it came from doesn't ascend toward the Pleroma. It recognizes that the Pleroma was never absent, only occluded. The levels aren't a ladder, they're a map of what you're uncovering. Stop cataloging, start recognizing. The level you're from isn't something you discover by reading more. It's something you discover by paying precise attention to what moves in you when the layers come off. You weren't separated from the Pleroma. You were the Pleroma, learning to forget. And now, maybe, beginning to remember. If this video resonated with you, let me know by commenting. I understood it.